Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Genesis chapter 39 in a clear and simple way, step by step. Okay, let's dive right into this explainer, where we're going to break down this incredible chapter and really understand Joseph's fascinating journey, literally going from a palace to a prison. We are going to go right through the text, verse by verse, looking strictly at the plain meaning, the pashhat, so we can deeply understand the sequence of events as they actually happened.
Now, I want you to think about this question for a second. How do you survive when doing the exact right thing ends up ruining your life? It's a heavy thought, right? But this question perfectly sets up the core dilemma Joseph faces in this chapter. It highlights that intense tension between having total integrity and facing completely unfair consequences. Before we jump into the verses themselves, let's just remember exactly where we are in the story. Joseph has just been betrayed by his own brothers. They threw him into a pit and they sold him to traveling merchants. He has lost his family, his home, and his freedom, and now he's been brought as a slave to a completely foreign land. Let's see how he survives. Here is our roadmap for unpacking the plain narrative of this text. We're going to cover Section 1, Arrival in Egypt. Section 2, The Daily Temptation. Section 3, The False Accusation. Section 4, Thrown into Prison. Section 5, Success in Captivity. And finally, Section 6, Practical Life Lessons. Let's start right at the beginning. Section 1, Arrival in Egypt. Genesis 39, verses 1 and 2. So, we begin with Joseph arriving in a foreign land, and he's been completely stripped of his former life. Verse 1 tells us that Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. He's bought from the Ishmaelites by a man named Potiphar. Now, this places Joseph directly into the household of a highly powerful and connected Egyptian official. Potiphar isn't just your average guy. The text explicitly tells us he is one of Pharaoh's officials and the captain of the guard. What does that mean? It essentially means he's the chief of police or maybe even the head executioner for the king of Egypt. So yes, Joseph is a slave, but he is a slave in a very prominent, very wealthy, and potentially very dangerous household. He's been completely uprooted. Yet as we move into the text, we start to see the immediate circumstances of his new life unfold. Now, what's really fascinating about verses 2 through 6 is this recurring, unmistakable motif. The text says plainly, right out of the gate, that the Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. And Potiphar, he actually saw this. He clearly saw that God gave Joseph success in absolutely everything he did. Because of this undeniable competence, Joseph found favor. He was promoted. First, he becomes Potiphar's personal attendant, and then he's put in charge of the entire household. The narrative really emphasizes that from the very moment Joseph was put in charge, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's household, both inside the house and out in the field, all because of Joseph. I mean, Potiphar trusted him so much that he left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph running the show, Potiphar didn't concern himself with anything except the food he ate. But you know, verse 6 ends with a very specific, fateful detail that pivots the entire story. It mentions that Joseph was well-built and handsome. Which leads us to Section 2, the Daily Temptation, Genesis 39, verses 7 through 10. So Joseph's rapid rise to power, combined with his physical appearance, brings about a severe new challenge. And this wasn't just a one-time awkward event. The tension builds intensely because Potiphar's wife relentlessly pursues him. Verse 7 says she took notice of him and just bluntly demanded, "Come to bed with me." But Joseph flat out refuses. And he actually explains his reasoning to her very clearly in verses 8 and 9. He lays out the absolute facts. He says, "Look, my master doesn't worry about a single thing in this house. Potiphar has entrusted everything to my care." Joseph literally says, "No one is greater in this house than I am." He points out that Potiphar has withheld absolutely nothing from him, except for her, simply because she is his wife. So the crucial takeaway here is Joseph's principled refusal. It's anchored in his absolute loyalty to his master's trust, for sure, but even more so in his obedience to the divine. Listen to this incredible quote from the end of verse 9. He doesn't just say, "Hey, I can't do this to my boss." He elevates the whole situation. He asks her, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" He fully recognizes that giving in wouldn't just be a betrayal of Potiphar. It would be a severe moral and spiritual failure. But verse 10 tells us she didn't stop. No, she spoke to Joseph day after day. Yet he consistently refused to go to bed with her or honestly even to be around her. He actively managed this toxic situation by avoiding her presence as much as possible, doing whatever he could to maintain his integrity in a deeply compromised environment. Section 3, The False Accusation, Genesis 39, verses 11 through 18. Now we move to the absolute climax of this confrontation. This happens on a day when none of the household servants are inside. This brilliantly illustrates the step-by-step deception Potiphar's wife orchestrates the moment Joseph runs away. Verse 11 sets the scene for us. Joseph goes into the house to attend to his normal duties, and the house is completely empty of other servants. They are totally alone. Verse 12 says she caught him by his cloak and repeated her demand. She physically grabs him. But Joseph makes the only safe choice available to him. He slips right out of his garment, leaves his cloak in her hand, and runs out of the house. Now, when she realizes she's been rejected yet again, but is suddenly holding his physical garment, she quickly shifts her strategy. Verses 13 and 14 tell us that to save face, and frankly to exact revenge, she calls out to her servants and starts screaming for help. Notice how opportunistically she twists the evidence here. She actively stokes resentment by emphasizing his status as an outsider, which is a stark contrast to the honest character Joseph has displayed. In verse 14, she tells her servants, "Look, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us." Using that specific term, Hebrew, was a very calculated way to highlight that he was a foreigner. She's tapping into prejudice to get the servants on her side. She claims he came in to sleep with her, but she screamed so loud that it forced him to run and leave his cloak behind. And then she keeps that cloak right beside her as fabricated evidence, just waiting until Potiphar comes home. When he finally arrives, verses 17 and 18 show her repeating the exact same lie. She says, "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me." Did you catch that? Notice how she subtly blames her husband here, phrasing it as the slave you brought us. It's a calculated, completely devastating manipulation of the facts. Section 4. Thrown into prison. Genesis 39, verses 19 and 20. The consequence of this orchestrated lie is immediate. It's devastating, and it is entirely unfair. Joseph is brought low once again, losing all his status and his freedom, despite having done the exact right thing. Verse 19 tells us that when Potiphar heard his wife's story, when she said, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. So Potiphar took Joseph and threw him in prison. But I want you to pay really close attention to a very specific detail in verse 20. He put him in the exact place where the king's prisoners were confined. Remember, because Potiphar was the captain of the guard, he had direct jurisdiction over the royal prison. So even in his punishment, Joseph is placed in a very specific, high-status facility. It's not just some common dungeon. Still, his steep descent from the head of a massive, wealthy household to an imprisoned slave is just a crushing blow. Section 5. Success in Captivity. Genesis 39, verses 21 through 23. Yet amazingly, the narrative loop of this entire chapter just repeats itself, even in the darkest and most hopeless of circumstances. Think about the incredible parallel happening here. The fact that Joseph achieved the exact same trusted status in a dungeon as he did in a palace really highlights the text's core theme of an unseen divine presence. Verse 21 says, "But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. God showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warder." Sound familiar? It should. Just like Potiphar did earlier, the warder puts Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. He makes him responsible for everything done down there. Verse 23 states the warder paid absolutely no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. It's a perfect thematic mirror to his time in the palace. It proves that his extreme competence and the divine favor resting on him were absolute constants. Finally, Section 6, Practical Life Lessons. Let's look at the conclusion. So, we've walked step by step through the plain narrative of this chapter, but what does this mean for us today? Well, these are simple but profoundly powerful takeaways. First, doing the right thing is about holding on to your identity. It doesn't necessarily guarantee an easy path. Joseph did the completely right thing by refusing his master's wife, and it still cost him his freedom. His integrity didn't magically protect him from a vicious false accusation or a prison sentence. However, his character remained absolutely constant, whether he was managing a vastly wealthy estate or sitting in a locked, dark cell. He was the exact same dependable, righteous man in both places. And maybe most importantly, this chapter teaches us that God's presence isn't just limited to our successes. It can be profoundly, undeniably present even in our lowest pits. I want to leave you with this provocative thought that really summarizes chapter 39, and I hope it leaves you eager to explore how Joseph's incredible story unfolds next. No matter where Joseph was physically placed, his internal compass never broke. He proved that true freedom is actually a state of character, even if you were locked inside a prison cell. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.